There is one rule in maritime law that has no exceptions, not the rules governing freedom of navigation, which China contests, not the rules governing innocent passage, which Iran disputes, not the rules governing exclusive economic zones, which half a dozen nations in the South China Sea have spent decades arguing about before international tribunals. The one rule, with no exceptions, accepted by every flag state, every naval tradition, every maritime code that has existed in any form since vessels first crossed open water, is the duty to render assistance to persons in distress at sea. Chapter 5 of the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea. SOLAS Regulation 33. The requirement is absolute. Every master of a ship who receives a signal from any source indicating that persons are in distress at sea is bound to proceed with all speed to their assistance, not when convenient, not when strategically advisable, not when the tactical picture permits. When the signal is received, the duty is to proceed. It carries the force of international treaty obligation, domestic implementing legislation in every signatory nation, and a moral weight that predates any of the legal instruments by several thousand years of maritime history. The IRGCN had been studying this rule for the same reason they had studied the Straits Dawn refraction window, the radar shadow profiles of Peykaap Island, and the transition timing between visual and electronic tracking, because an absolute rule is an absolute lever. If the duty to render assistance cannot be declined, then triggering the duty is a method of controlling the behavior of any vessel that operates within the law. At 9:44 a.m. on a Tuesday in the southern Persian Gulf, approximately 38 nautical miles southeast of Abu Musa Island, an emergency position indicating radio beacon activated in the water. The EPIRB signal registered simultaneously on the patrol ship's own receivers, on the Fleet Communications Circuit connecting it to 5th Fleet in Bahrain, and on the international Kospes-Sarsat satellite network that relayed emergency maritime distress signals to rescue coordination centers worldwide. The signal's position data placed it at bearing 034 degrees, range 4.1 nautical miles from the destroyer's current position. The registration data encoded in the EPIRB's signal, a unique identifier that, under normal circumstances, linked a beacon to a specific registered vessel and its owner. Return to registration consistent with a small dhow-type vessel previously documented in the Gulf as operating in the general Abu Musa area. By every protocol of maritime distress response, the destroyer was now obligated to respond. Quote, zero quote, the CIC reported. Quote, one quote, the officer of the deck acknowledged the report and looked at the captain. The captain had been on the bridge since 9:30 a.m., 14 minutes before the EPIRB activated. He was at the center bridge window. He had not moved. The pause between the CIC report and the captain's next words was 4 seconds. Not a long pause by most measures. By bridge standards during a developing tactical situation, 4 seconds of command silence after a distress signal report carries its own information. The commanding officer is processing, not reacting. He is applying something to the raw data before he responds. What he was applying in this case was the operational briefing he had received from 5th Fleet Intelligence 11 days before deploying. A briefing that had included a specific section titled EPIRB Facilitated Approach Tactics, and had devoted 6 pages to documented and suspected IRGCN use of emergency signaling to control the movement of U.S. vessels in the Gulf. The briefing had not given him permission to ignore a distress signal. Nothing in any legal or operational framework gave him that permission. The duty to render assistance was absolute. What the briefing had given him was a vocabulary for what he was looking at when he saw it, and a set of procedural tools for responding to the duty in a way that fulfilled its legal requirements while limiting the tactical exposure that the IRGCN was attempting to create. Log the EPIRB activation, timestamp, bearing, range, registration data, notify 5th Fleet of our intent to respond per SOLAS, obligations, FLIR to bearing 034. He paused 1 more second. Do not alter course yet. Assess first. The FLIR trained to bearing 034 at 4.1 nautical miles in moderate Gulf haze, visibility approximately 8 nautical miles. The thermal imaging system could resolve vessel-size objects at that range in good conditions. The conditions were adequate. The image that developed over the next 40 seconds showed a small vessel, dhow-type, 20 to 25 meters, in approximately the position where the EPIRB signal originated. The vessel appeared stationary. Its engine signature on FLIR was present but low. A warm but not running hard thermal gradient, consistent with a vessel that had its engine at idle rather than a vessel actively maneuvering. A vessel in genuine distress typically showed one of 2 thermal profiles, either a cold engine indicating loss of power or a hot engine at high output, indicating a crew running at full power to manage a developing emergency. A vessel at idle in the position of an EPIRB activation was a vessel that had activated a distress beacon and then stopped, and waited. The captain registered the thermal profile. He said nothing about it directly. He filed it. CPA to the EPIRB contact if we alter course to assist at 20 knots. CPA, direct approach. Contact in approximately 7.3 minutes at 20 knots. 7.3 minutes at 20 knots to reach a vessel showing an idle engine thermal profile at the position of an EPIRB activation in the southern Persian Gulf, 38 nautical miles from Abu Musa Island, in waters the IRGCN had been documented operating in for decades. The surface search radar picture at bearing 034 showed 1 contact at the EPIRB position and nothing else within 2 nautical miles. Clear water around the distress contact. No other radar returns. At 9:46 a.m., the radar picture changed. Bridge, CIC, new contacts, bearing 055, emerging from the Abu Musa Island radar shadow. 4 contacts, speed 38 to 42 knots, course 195 degrees. AIS dark, range 11.2 nautical miles. 4 contacts. From behind Abu Musa Island, the IRGCN forward staging base, the position from which fast attack assets launched with the confidence of people operating from home territory. Bearing 055, range 11.2 miles, moving at 38 to 42 knots, on course 195 degrees. At combined closure with a destroyer that had just been obligated to alter course to bearing 034 to respond to a distress signal at 20 knots, 12 minutes to CPA. The geometry was not complicated. The EPIRB at bearing 034 required the destroyer to turn away from its current heading and move toward the northeast, toward Abu Musa Island. The 4 fast contacts from behind Abu Musa Island were moving south-southwest on course 195 degrees, a destroyer proceeding to a distress contact at bearing 034 and 4 fast contacts on course 195 degrees from bearing 055 would converge in the space between the EPIRB position and the island's eastern approach at approximately the same time. The EPIRB was the door. The 4 fast contacts were waiting on the other side of it. Quote, _8, the captain said quietly. Not to anyone in particular, to himself, or to the air of the bridge. The cost of the situation had 2 components that operated in opposite directions. The cost of altering course to render assistance, 7.3 minutes at 20 knots toward a position where 4 IRGCN fast contacts would arrive at approximately the same time in a tactical geometry that had been designed to be exploited, was a cost measured in tactical exposure in footage of a U.S. warship moving in a direction the IRGCN had selected for it in the positioning that would follow. The cost of not altering course to render assistance, of a commanding officer determining that a SOLAS triggering distress signal was a provocation rather than a genuine emergency and declining to respond, was a cost measured in legal exposure in the record that a U.S. warship had received an EPIRB signal and had not proceeded in the diplomatic and professional consequences of that record existing. The absolute rule was absolute in both directions. It obligated response. It also obligated the commanding officer to make the response in a way that protected his ship and crew while fulfilling the duty. SOLAS Regulation 33 required proceeding to render assistance. It did not require proceeding in a way that maximized tactical vulnerability. At 9:48 a.m., the first friction arrived. 5th Fleet's communication circuit activated with a priority message. The COSPAS SARSAT relay had transmitted the EPIRB activation data to the Iranian Maritime Rescue Coordination Center as well as to 5th Fleet, as the satellite network's protocol required. All relevant rescue coordination centers received all distress signals originating in their search and rescue regions. The Iranian MRCC had acknowledged the signal and had transmitted a response indicating that Iranian Coast Guard assets were being dispatched to render assistance. The message reached 5th Fleet within 3 minutes of the EPIRB activation, and 5th Fleet's relay to the destroyer indicated that Iranian Coast Guard assets, origin and number not specified, were supposedly en route to the distress position. If Iranian Coast Guard assets were responding, the destroyer's obligation under SOLAS shifted. A master who has received information that another vessel is rendering assistance is released from the obligation to proceed when it is unreasonable or unnecessary to render additional assistance. The question was whether the Iranian Coast Guard dispatch notification constituted, quote, 9, or was itself part of the operational framing designed to complicate the destroyer's response. JAG officer to the bridge, the captain said. The ship's legal officer arrived in 90 seconds. The captain presented the situation in 30 words. EPIRB activated, bearing 034. 4 fast contacts from Abu Musa, bearing 055. 5th Fleet relay, indicating Iranian MRCC has dispatched assets. Underscore, quote, underscore, 11, underscore. The legal officer's assessment took 45 seconds. The notification of dispatch indicated intent to render assistance but did not confirm that assistance was being rendered under the standard interpretation applied by IMO guidance. The destruction of the obligation required confirmation that another vessel was actually on scene or had assumed responsibility for the rescue. Intent to dispatch was insufficient. The obligation remained unless and until another vessel arrived at the distressed position and assumed responsibility. The obligation remained. CPA to fast contacts, 2,800 yards, 9 minutes. The captain made his first decision. Alter course to bearing 034, speed 12 knots, not 20. We are responding to the EPIRB. We are doing it at 12 knots. The speed choice was specific. SOLAS required proceeding with all speed, a phrase that maritime law interpreted as the best speed the vessel could make, given all relevant circumstances, including the safety of the vessel and crew. An approaching formation of 4 unidentified fast contacts on intercept course was a relevant circumstance. 12 knots was a speed that fulfilled the obligation to respond while maintaining the tactical positioning necessary to manage the fast contact threat. Seahawk, launch. Proceed to the EPIRB position. I want crew assessment and vessel status before we arrive. I also want eyes on those 4 fast contacts from Abu Musa. The helicopter launched at 9:52 a.m. and split its route. First to the fast contacts, positioning for a high-altitude threat assessment before descending to the EPIRB position for the vessel inspection. The Seahawk reached the fast contacts at 9:54 a.m. 4 Peykaap class fast attack craft running at 40 knots. AIS dark, no lights. FLIR confirmed 4 crew per boat on average. Camera equipment visible on the lead craft. Not weapons in an engaged configuration. Cameras. The IRGCN's fast contacts were equipped for filming, not for direct confrontation. At 9:55 a.m., the Seahawk repositioned over the EPIRB contact. Intact vessel. Standing crew member manually activated EPIRB running engine. A manually activated EPIRB on a vessel with a standing crew member who was watching the helicopter and whose vessel showed no damage was not a crew in distress. It was a crew that had pushed a button. The captain received the Seahawk's report. He updated the log. He did not alter course a second time. Maintain course and speed. Continue toward the distress position. Document everything. At 9:58 a.m., the second friction arrived. The 4 fast contacts from Abu Musa had closed to 1,800 yards from their initial intercept track. But the destroyer's lower speed of 12 knots, rather than the 20-knot approach the IRGCN geometry had been designed around, had changed the timing. At 20 knots, the destroyer would have been at the EPIRB position when the fast contacts arrived. At 12 knots, the destroyer was still 2.3 nautical miles from the EPIRB position when the fast contacts reached the geometry's intended convergence point and found nothing there. The U.S. ship was not at the point where the EPIRB geometry had placed it. The timing had been disrupted by 8 knots. Fast contacts, CPA, revised. Lead element, CPA, 1,400 yards. But we are not at the convergence point. They are passing ahead of our position. The fast contacts had been designed to intercept a destroyer at a specific location at a specific time. The destroyer was not at that location at that time. The fast contacts were now passing through an empty point in the Gulf at 40 knots, and the destroyer was 2.3 nautical miles south of where they expected it to be. Fast contacts adjusting course, turning to follow our actual position. The adjustment required the fast contacts to slow their approach, recalculate, and reorient, losing the geometric precision that the EPIRB timing had been designed to produce. The formation was reacting rather than executing. CIWS to passive thermal track, lead fast contact. The close-in weapons system rotated, the barrel oriented toward the lead Peykaap as it adjusted its course to follow the destroyer's actual position, not engage. Tracking. The thermal signature of the CIWS barrel's rotation was visible to the Peykaap crew's own thermal imaging equipment. They knew what it meant. At 10:03 a.m., the Seahawk descended to 50 feet above the dhow at the EPIRB position and transmitted a bridge-to-bridge call to the vessel on channel 16, quote, 21, no response on channel 16. The crew member on the dhow's aft deck was still visible to the Seahawk's FLIR. He had moved from the stern rail to the midships area. He was not attempting to signal the helicopter. He was not in any visible distress. He was standing on the deck of an intact vessel with a running engine, watching a U.S. military helicopter at 50 feet, quote, 22, At 10:05 a.m., the dhows engine note increased. Its speed readout on the Seahawk's radar, 3 knots, then 7, then 11. The dhow was moving, not toward the destroyer, not in any direction consistent with a vessel that needed assistance. It was moving northeast, toward Abu Musa Island, accelerating steadily. A vessel in genuine distress does not accelerate away from approaching rescuers when the rescuers are visible overhead. At 10:07 a.m., the captain authorized the formal documentation transmission to 5th Fleet, EPIRB. Activation assessed as intentional simulation. Distress position shows no vessel in genuine distress. Crew, visible and mobile on intact vessel with running propulsion. Vessel, departing the distress position under own power. 4. IRGCN fast attack contacts attempted intercept approach from Abu Musa Island based on projected rescue course, disrupted by speed selection. Continuing to distress position for final on-scene assessment before securing response. The 4 fast contacts, having lost the timing and geometry of their approach, were now holding position at approximately 1,100 yards from the destroyer's beam. The Peykaap formation that had been designed to intercept and surround a U.S. ship responding to a distress call at 20 knots was now holding at 1,100 yards from a U.S. ship at 12 knots with a Seahawk overhead, CIWS in passive track, and a documentation record of a fake distress signal that was already in 5th Fleet system, quote, 23, The destroyer reached the EPIRB position at 10:09 a.m. The dhow was gone, now at 1.8 nautical miles to the northeast and moving at 14 knots toward Abu Musa. The Seahawk confirmed the position and logged the departure. The EPIRB signal was still transmitting from the position. The beacon, apparently, had been discarded or was still attached to a floating object the dhow had left behind. The Seahawk's FLIR confirmed a small floating object at the EPIRB position. The beacon itself floating free, continuing to signal a distress that no longer had anyone attached to it. We have completed our SOLAS obligation, the legal officer confirmed from the bridge when the captain asked. We proceeded to the position. We assessed the situation. We hailed the vessel. No persons were in distress. The obligation is fulfilled. At 10:11 a.m., the captain secured the SOLAS response and ordered the destroyer to resume its original heading and speed. CPA fast contacts opening. Lead element now at 1,400 yards. The 4 Peykaap contacts, which had held at 1,100 yards during the destroyer's on-scene assessment, were no longer on the intercept geometry their approach had been designed to create, with the destroyer resuming its original track and accelerating back to 14 knots. The fast contact's tactical position required them either to pursue, which meant following a 9,200-ton warship with a Seahawk overhead and CIWS in track mode at their flank, or to withdraw. They had no camera footage of an American warship maneuvering in response to an IRGCN provocation. They had footage of a U.S. destroyer responding to a distress signal at 12 knots, conducting an on-scene assessment, hailing the distressed vessel, and resuming transit when the vessel departed under its own power. At 10:14 a.m., the lead Peykaap reduced speed. At 10:17 a.m., all 4 contacts were showing reduced speed and bearing drift consistent with withdrawal toward Abu Musa. The helmsman had held the altered course of bearing 034 for 17 minutes at 12 knots, and had then resumed original heading. His hands had been on the wheel through the entire sequence, through the EPIRB alert, through the 4 fast contacts approach, through the on-scene assessment, through the dhow's acceleration, away from a rescue it had triggered. He had held what he was given. When the resumption order came, he adjusted heading with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been waiting for it, settled onto the new course, and kept his eyes forward. He was relieved 90 minutes later at the standard watch rotation. When the incoming helmsman asked how the watch had been, the outgoing helmsman said, "Eventful." He did not elaborate. The incoming helmsman did not push the point. Both of them understood that eventful in the Persian Gulf covered a range that normal language did not have a useful shorthand for. 1 EPIRB signal manually activated. 1 dhow intact, crew standing, departed under own power. 4 Peykaap class fast contacts from Abu Musa. 73 minutes from EPIRB activation to final fast contact withdrawal. 1,100 yards. Closest approach by fast contacts during the on-scene assessment phase. 0 course alterations beyond the legally required SOLAS response course. 0 speed above 12 knots during the response phase. 0 persons in distress found at the distress position. SOLAS obligation fulfilled and documented. The duty to render assistance has no exceptions. The duty to render it intelligently, at the speed and on the geometry that protects the responding vessel while fulfilling the law, is the part that does not appear in the convention text. It exists in the judgment of commanding officers who have read both the law and the intelligence briefings, and who understand that an absolute obligation carefully executed cannot be weaponized against the person fulfilling it. The EPIRB floated in the southern Persian Gulf for another 40 minutes, still transmitting until its battery depleted and the signal ceased. The satellite network logged the cessation. Nobody was in distress. The signal simply stopped